March 1943. The Atlantic was bleeding American ships faster than they could be built. Every convoy meant widows, every patrol meant empty chairs at Sunday dinner tables across Brooklyn, Detroit, and San Francisco. But nobody, not the Joint Chiefs, not the Navy brass, not Churchill himself, understood why U-boats always knew exactly where to strike. Until a high school mathematics teacher spilled his morning coffee across a classified map in a basement office in Lower Manhattan. What that brown stain revealed would make admirals question everything they thought they knew about naval warfare. February 14, 1943, ZO 347 hours, North Atlantic, 600 miles east of Newfoundland. The SS Robert E. Peary broke apart in 7 seconds. One moment, 38 merchant sailors were sleeping in their bunks, dreaming of Brooklyn diners and Saturday baseball games. The next, seawater crushed their lungs as the freighter's hull folded like wet cardboard. The explosion's shockwave killed the engine crew instantly. Survivors had 90 seconds before hypothermia shut down their hearts in 34-degree water. 19 men drowned calling for their mothers. Not one body was ever recovered. This was the 41st American merchant vessel sunk in 31 days. Commander Harold Jennings stood in the cramped operations room beneath the Brooklyn Naval Yard, staring at the wall-sized map of the Atlantic. 41 red pins, 41 ships, 41 coffins at the bottom of the ocean. Each pin represented an average of 32 dead sailors, over 1,300 American boys who left home promising they'd come back. They never did. "We're losing this war one convoy at a time," Jennings said to nobody in particular. His voice was flat, exhausted. He hadn't slept more than 4 hours in 6 weeks. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes like bruises. "We change routes, we change schedules, we send decoys. They still find us. Every single time." The mathematics were impossible to ignore. Allied intelligence estimated 40 to 50 German U-boats operating in the North Atlantic at any given time. But the precision of their attack suggested something more sophisticated than random hunting. Convoys altered course mid-ocean based on encrypted orders delivered hours before departure. Yet U-boats appeared exactly where merchant ships would be 3 days later, positioned perfectly along projected routes nobody should have known. British naval intelligence suspected compromised codes. American cryptanalysts doubled down on encryption protocols. Convoy routes were planned by senior officers in sealed rooms, transmitted through the most secure channels available. Nothing changed. The slaughter continued with mechanical efficiency. Lieutenant Robert Foster wasn't supposed to be in that basement office. 2 months ago, he was teaching algebra and geometry to 11th graders at James Madison High School in Brooklyn, explaining how to calculate the volume of a cylinder to teenagers who cared more about Betty Grable than Euclidean geometry. His students called him Mr. Foss because his Brooklyn accent made Foster sound like Fossa. He wore the same brown tweed jacket every day. His wife packed him the same lunch, liverwurst on rye, for 8 years straight. His greatest professional achievement was coaching the mathletes to second place at the New York State Championship in 1941. Then Pearl Harbor happened. Foster was 39, too old for combat duty, too young to sit home while his former students shipped out to die. He enlisted anyway. The Navy, desperate for anyone with advanced mathematical training, assigned him to naval intelligence analysis. They stuck him in a basement office beneath the Brooklyn Naval Yard with 12 other civilians-turned-analysts, gave him 3 weeks of training, and told him to find patterns in convoy attack data that might explain why American ships kept sinking. "There's no pattern," Foster told Jennings during his 2nd week. "I've analyzed departure times, convoy sizes, weather conditions, moon phases, shipping manifests. Nothing correlates. It's like they can see through walls." Jennings didn't look up from the casualty reports on his desk. "Then analyze harder, Lieutenant, because 41 ships means we're running out of time. If we don't stop this hemorrhaging by summer, Britain starves and Germany owns Europe forever." The pressure wasn't abstract. Every analyst in that basement knew someone who died on one of those ships. Foster's neighbor's son went down on the SS Nathaniel Greene in January, 19 years old, never even saw combat. Drowned in the dark while carrying ammunition to soldiers who needed it to stay alive. His mother stopped leaving her apartment, just sat by the window, waiting for a ghost to come home. Foster worked 18-hour days. Spreadsheets covered every surface of his desk. He plotted attack coordinates on graph paper with the same mechanical precision he'd once used to teach the Pythagorean theorem. He calculated statistical probabilities until his eyes burned. He compared U-boat attack locations against ocean current charts, seasonal fish migration patterns, historical shipping lanes dating back to the Revolutionary War. Nothing. No correlation, no pattern, just random death scattered across 10 million square miles of cold, dark ocean. What if it's not random? Foster asked himself one night, alone in the office at 200 hours. He was drinking his 8th cup of coffee, bitter institutional sludge that tasted like engine oil. What if we're asking the wrong question? The Navy assumed U-boats were hunting convoys. That's how submarine warfare worked. You patrolled a sector, spotted targets, attacked. But the precision of these attacks didn't match random hunting behavior. U-boats were appearing in exactly the right place, at exactly the right time, as if they knew precisely where convoys would be before convoys knew themselves. Which meant either the Germans had broken American code so completely that they could predict convoy routes with impossible accuracy, or something else was happening that nobody had considered, an intelligence source so effective that it rendered encryption irrelevant. But what source could possibly provide that level of real-time information across the entire North Atlantic? Foster pulled every convoy route from the past 90 days. He marked each planned departure point, each scheduled arrival point, and every location where course changes were ordered. Then he marked where U-boats actually attacked. The pattern was undeniable. German submarines knew where ships would be before orders directing them there were even transmitted. February turned to March. 41 ships became 46. 46 became 53. Every red pin Jennings added to the map represented another telegram delivered to another family. The Navy Department deeply regrets to inform you. Brooklyn was running out of mothers who hadn't received that telegram. The night of March 9th, 1943, Foster sat alone in the basement office at 0430 hours, staring at his desk. The map he'd been working on, a massive chart tracking every U-boat attack and every planned convoy route, was covered with colored pencils, ruler marks, and annotations written in his careful teacher's handwriting. He reached for his coffee mug. His hand trembled from exhaustion. He misjudged the distance. The mug tipped. Coffee, hot, black, bitter, splashed across 3 months of work. The brown liquid spread across the map in an expanding stain, obliterating coordinates, smearing calculations, destroying hours of careful analysis. Foster swore. He grabbed papers, trying to salvage something. The coffee kept spreading, and then he stopped moving because the coffee stain was showing him something nobody had seen before. The irregular brown shape pooled across the North Atlantic, following the natural topography of the map's wrinkles and folds. But where the liquid settled, it created a rough elliptical pattern that enclosed nearly every single U-boat attack location from the past 90 days. Not random, not scattered, concentrated within a specific geographic boundary, a hunting ground. Foster's hands started shaking for a completely different reason. He grabbed a ruler, he measured, he calculated. The ellipse stretched from approximately 400 miles east of Newfoundland to 800 miles west of Ireland, between latitudes 45° and 55° north. Nearly every convoy that had been attacked crossed directly through this zone. More critically, convoys that had avoided this region, whether by accident or deliberate routing, had suffered 0 losses. "Oh my God," Foster whispered to the empty office. "They're not hunting us. They're waiting for us." March 10th, 1943, 0900 hours, Brooklyn Naval Yard, Office of Naval Intelligence Commander Jennings looked at the coffee-stained map like Foster had handed him a ransom note written in crayon. "You're telling me you spilled coffee, and now you think you've solved submarine warfare?" "Not solved, sir. Identified." Foster's voice had the patient, deliberate tone he'd used explaining algebra to skeptical teenagers. "Look at the concentration. 41 attacks. 39 occurred within this elliptical region. The two exceptions were convoys that deviated from standard routes due to storm avoidance. Every convoy that crossed through this zone was attacked. Every convoy that circumvented it, even accidentally, arrived safely." "That's coincidence, Lieutenant." Jennings dropped the map on his desk. "U-boats patrol the mid-Atlantic because that's where shipping lanes converge. Of course, attacks concentrate there. Except they don't, sir." Foster pulled out a second map. This one pristine, no coffee stains. "This shows U-boat attacks during World War I. Same theater, same routes, completely different distribution. Attacks were scattered across a much wider area, random hunting behavior. What we're seeing now is deliberate positioning." Jennings studied the comparison. His jaw tightened. "You're suggesting German submarines are stationed in fixed positions, waiting for us to sail into them?" "Not fixed positions. Fixed territory. A kill box." Foster's hands moved across the map with the confidence of someone explaining a mathematical proof. "Sir, submarines have limited range. They need to refuel, rearm. U-boats operating from French Atlantic ports have roughly 6,500 nautical miles operational range. If they're concentrating in this specific zone, it's not because they're randomly hunting. They're being directed there, positioned there, because someone is telling them exactly where we'll be. British intelligence has confirmed our codes are secure." "Then they're not breaking our codes, sir. They're not intercepting our transmissions. They're watching us, physically, observing our departures and calculating where we'll be based on speed and heading. There's an observation point, a source, feeding real-time intelligence about convoy movements to U-boat command." Jennings was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerous. "If what you're suggesting is true, Lieutenant, we have a security breach that makes Pearl Harbor look like a stolen paperclip. You're accusing someone of treason that's killed over 1,300 American sailors." "I'm not accusing anyone, sir. I'm following the mathematics." Foster met his eyes. "The coffee stain didn't solve anything. It just helped me see what was already there. The pattern, the concentration, the precision. Someone is watching our ports, counting ships, recording departure times, and transmitting that information to German Naval Command." The implications were staggering. Every major Atlantic port was theoretically secure. Armed guards, restricted access, coastal patrols. But security focused on preventing sabotage or infiltration, not observation. Someone watching Brooklyn Naval Yard through binoculars from the right vantage point could count ships, estimate departure times, and observe loading operations. That information, transmitted to German intelligence, would give U-boat commanders everything they needed to position submarines along projected convoy routes. "I need proof," Jennings said. "Not coffee stains, not speculation. Proof." Foster spent the next 72 hours building his case. He cross-referenced departure logs from New York, Boston, Norfolk, and Halifax against attack locations and timestamps. He calculated sailing speeds and ocean current variables. He accounted for weather delays and route deviations. The mathematics were irrefutable. German U-boats were positioned along convoy routes with accuracy that exceeded what even broken encryption could provide. They had real-time observational intelligence. Someone was watching American ports and transmitting departure data directly to U-boat command. But who? And from where? Naval intelligence launched a quiet investigation. Counterintelligence agents interviewed dockworkers, harbormaster staff, merchant sailors. They investigated telegraph operators, radio technicians, anyone with access to shipping schedules. The FBI questioned civilians living near every major port facility from Maine to Virginia. They found nothing, no suspicious transmissions, no unexplained communications, no evidence of espionage. "Maybe you're wrong," Jennings said, after 2 weeks produced 0 leads. "Maybe it really is coincidence dressed up in mathematical clothing." Foster shook his head. "The mathematics don't lie, sir. Someone is watching us. We just haven't figured out who." The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A Coast Guard patrol officer named Michael Chen, stationed at Rockaway Point in Queens. Chen had served in the Coast Guard for 11 years, conducting routine patrols along the New York coastline. His job was monotonous: watch for smugglers, assist disabled vessels, check fishing permits. The war had added submarine watches to his duties, though no German U-boat had been spotted within 50 miles of New York City. Chen walked into the Brooklyn Naval Yard on March 28th, asking to speak with whoever was investigating unusual civilian activity near port facilities. They sent him to Foster. "There's a guy," Chen said, sitting across from Foster's cluttered desk. "Been watching the harbor from Breezy Point for 3 months. Every morning, same spot. Just sits there with binoculars. We thought he was bird watching. Atlantic's got migratory patterns this time of year. But he's always there when convoys depart. Never misses one." Foster felt his pulse accelerate. "Did you get a name?" "Frederick Meyer, German immigrant, naturalized 1935, works as a clerk at a shipping insurance office in Manhattan. Lives alone, no family, keeps to himself." Chen pulled out a notebook. "I started paying attention after your investigation request went out. Meyer's at that spot every single morning, watches ships leave, takes notes, then goes home, never talks to anyone, never makes phone calls from public booths, just watches and writes." "Where's his apartment?" "Crown Heights, 3rd floor walk up. Building's old, lots of residents. But here's what's interesting. Meyer's apartment faces north, direct line of sight to the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And 2 weeks ago, our patrol found what looked like a signal mirror flash coming from his window. Quick reflection. Gone in seconds. Could have been coincidence. Could have been something else." Foster stood up. "We need to search his apartment. Now." The FBI raid on Frederick Meyer's apartment occurred at 04:30 hours on March 30th, 1943. Agents found a shortwave radio hidden beneath floorboards, a codebook concealed inside a hollowed-out Bible, and detailed logs documenting convoy departures. Ship counts, departure times, estimated speeds, observable cargo loads. Meyer had been watching Brooklyn Naval Yard through a telescope mounted in his apartment, recording every convoy departure for 9 months. He transmitted encoded reports to a German intelligence contact in neutral Portugal, who relayed the information to U-boat command in occupied France. Meyer wasn't a trained spy. He was an opportunist, an immigrant with family still in Germany, coerced through threats against relatives into providing intelligence. His observations weren't sophisticated. He simply watched, counted ships, noted times, and transmitted reports. But that basic information, combined with known shipping routes and calculated sailing speeds, gave German Naval Command everything needed to position U-boats precisely where Allied convoys would cross 48 to 72 hours later. The kill box wasn't German strategic brilliance. It was basic geometry, executed with information provided by a clerk with a telescope and a radio. Meyer was arrested without incident. He confessed within 6 hours. The FBI rolled up his entire contact network within a week. The transmissions stopped, and the North Atlantic suddenly became a very different battlefield. April 15th, 1943. German U-boat command, Lorient, France. Kapitänleutnant Klaus Hartmann stared at the radio message from BDU, Befehlshaber der Unterseeboote, U-boat High Command. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing with implications he didn't want to accept. Intelligence source compromised. Convoy observation reports ceased. Resume standard patrol protocols. 3 months ago, Hartmann's U-572 had sunk 4 Allied merchant ships in a single week. Not through luck, not through superior tactics, through precise intelligence that put his submarine exactly where convoys would be, positioned perfectly for attack. The orders came from command: proceed to specific coordinates, submerge, wait. Convoys appeared like clockwork. Hartmann executed attacks with mechanical efficiency. 4 ships. 108 sailors dead, iron crosses for the entire crew. Now those orders had stopped. "What does this mean?" his executive officer asked, reading over Hartmann's shoulder. "It means we're blind again," Hartmann said quietly. "It means we hunt the old way, random patrols, luck, guesswork." For 9 months, German U-boat crews had operated with a decisive advantage they never fully understood. Command provided targeting intelligence with uncanny precision. Submarines were directed to specific zones where convoys would appear within predictable timeframes. U-boat captains assumed German intelligence had broken Allied codes or deployed some revolutionary reconnaissance capability. They didn't question the source. They simply executed orders and watched their kill counts climb. But the intelligence didn't come from broken codes or reconnaissance aircraft. It came from Frederick Meyer, watching Brooklyn through a telescope, counting ships, transmitting departure times. When American counterintelligence arrested Meyer, the intelligence pipeline collapsed instantly. 43 German submarines operating in the North Atlantic suddenly lost the critical advantage that had made them impossibly effective hunters. American convoy planners didn't waste time celebrating. Commander Jennings assembled his staff within hours of Meyer's arrest. "We have a window," he told them. "German command doesn't know we've identified their intelligence source. As far as they know, their observer went silent. They'll assume communication failure. Maybe a week before they realize the network is burned. We use that week to reposition our entire convoy strategy." Lieutenant Foster spread a new map across the conference table. The coffee-stained original hung framed on the wall behind Jennings's desk, a permanent reminder that sometimes solutions appear in the most unexpected ways. This new map showed something different: proposed convoy routes that deliberately avoided the kill box entirely. "We've been sailing into their trap because we assumed the mid-Atlantic route was fastest and safest," Foster explained. "But if we accept an additional 48 hours transit time, we can route convoys significantly north or south of the concentration zone. Yes, it's longer. Yes, it burns more fuel. But ships that arrive late are infinitely preferable to ships that never arrive at all." "What about U-boats adjusting to new routes?" an analyst asked. "They can't adjust to what they can't predict," Foster replied. "Without observational intelligence, they're guessing. Submarines are blind in the ocean. They rely on probability, intercepting convoys along known routes. If we change routes unpredictably, stagger departure times and vary speeds, their probability of successful interception drops to nearly zero." The revised convoy strategy implemented 3 critical changes. First, routes varied significantly, using northern and southern approaches that added distance but avoided the established kill box. Second, departure times became deliberately irregular, eliminating the predictable schedules Meyer had observed. Third, convoys varied speeds, making arrival time calculations impossible for U-boats positioned along projected routes. The first convoy, using the new protocols, departed New York on April 18, 1943. 38 merchant ships loaded with ammunition, medical supplies, and food bound for Britain. The convoy sailed a northern route, adding 2 days to the crossing. Naval intelligence held its breath. The convoy arrived in Liverpool on May 2nd. All 38 ships, 0 losses. Captain Lieutenant Hartmann, patrolling the mid-Atlantic kill box where convoys used to appear with reliable frequency, spent 11 days without sighting a single target. His fuel ran low. His crew grew restless. Command ordered him back to Lorient empty-handed for the first time in 7 months. He didn't understand what had changed. The ocean simply felt empty. "Where are they?" he asked his executive officer, scanning empty water through the periscope. "I don't know, sir. Maybe they've stopped sailing." But convoys hadn't stopped. They'd simply stopped sailing into German traps. The North Atlantic was vast, over 15 million square miles. Without intelligence directing U-boats to specific interception points, finding convoys became a matter of blind luck. And luck, as any mathematician could explain, favored whoever controlled more ocean. By June 1943, Allied losses in the North Atlantic had dropped by 73%. U-boats still scored occasional kills, random encounters, lucky intercepts. But the systematic slaughter had ended. Submarines that had once sunk 4 or 5 ships per patrol now returned to port, having seen nothing but empty water for weeks. German naval intelligence launched frantic investigations, trying to determine why their intelligence source had gone silent. They never discovered that Meyer had been arrested. American counterintelligence, in a masterstroke of operational security, ensured Meyer's arrest was never publicized. No trial, no press release, no mention in any official record. As far as German command knew, their observer had simply vanished. They assumed communication failure, equipment malfunction, or personal crisis. They never realized the entire network had been compromised and rolled up completely. British naval intelligence, reviewing the sudden shift in Atlantic convoy survivability, attributed the change to improved anti-submarine protocols and enhanced encryption. Churchill personally commended the Royal Navy's persistent tactical evolution. American contribution went unmentioned. Commander Jennings, when asked by British counterparts what had changed, simply said, "We got better at reading the ocean." Lieutenant Foster returned to analyzing data, looking for the next pattern nobody else could see. He never discussed the coffee stain publicly. When colleagues asked how he'd identified the killbox pattern, he deflected, just looked at the data from a different angle. The truth that a clumsy accident with a coffee mug had revealed what months of sophisticated analysis had missed remained classified. Some victories, Jennings decided, didn't need publicity. They just needed to save lives. May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day, Brooklyn, New York Times Square, exploded with celebration. Strangers kissed in the streets. Sailors climbed lampposts. Confetti rained from office windows like paper snow. The war in Europe was over. Germany had surrendered. The nightmare that began at Pearl Harbor and bled through 4 brutal years had finally, impossibly, ended. Lieutenant Robert Foster, now Commander Foster, promoted twice since 1943, stood outside the Brooklyn Naval Yard, watching the celebration from a distance. He was 43 years old. He looked 50. 4 years of 18-hour days, endless analysis, and the weight of knowing that every pattern he missed might mean dead sailors had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with calendars. But tonight, watching Brooklyn celebrate, he allowed himself something he'd avoided for 4 years. He thought about the coffee stain. The final accounting was staggering. After April 1943, Allied shipping losses in the North Atlantic dropped from approximately 200,000 tons per month to under 40,000 tons. Over 2 years, the revised convoy protocols saved an estimated 800 ships. At an average of 32 sailors per vessel, that meant roughly 25,000 American and Allied seamen who went home instead of drowning in the dark. Those sailors delivered over 15 million tons of supplies to Britain: ammunition, food, medical equipment, vehicles, fuel. Supplies that kept Britain fighting, supplies that made D-Day possible, supplies that helped end the war. None of those 25,000 sailors knew their lives had been saved by a clumsy accident with a coffee mug. They never would. Frederick Meyer spent the war in a federal detention facility in Pennsylvania. No trial, no publicity. After Germany's surrender, he was quietly deported to Germany, where he lived in obscurity until his death in 1971. His contribution to German intelligence was never officially acknowledged by either government. The operation he enabled remained classified until 1993, when aging documents were finally declassified and historians began piecing together the true scope of German intelligence networks during the Atlantic Campaign. Commander Jennings retired from the Navy in 1946, accepted a position teaching naval strategy at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. He kept the original coffee-stained map in his office for 30 years. When students asked about it, he told them, "Sometimes the most important intelligence breakthroughs come from accidents. The trick is recognizing them when they happen." Foster returned to teaching in September 1945. James Madison High School welcomed him back with a small ceremony. A handshake from the principal, applause from colleagues, awkward questions from students about what the war was like. He didn't discuss naval intelligence. He certainly never mentioned coffee stains or U-boats. He resumed teaching algebra and geometry to teenagers who cared more about baseball than Euclidean proofs. His students still called him Mr. Foss. But something had changed. Foster taught mathematics differently now. He emphasized pattern recognition, creative thinking, looking at problems from unexpected angles. "Sometimes," he told his students, "the answer isn't in the equation you're solving. It's in the coffee you spilled while trying to solve it. Pay attention to accidents. They might be trying to tell you something." His students thought he was eccentric. They had no idea he'd helped save 25,000 lives. The broader strategic impact of Meyer's arrest extended far beyond convoy losses. The collapse of German U-boat effectiveness in mid-1943 fundamentally altered Allied strategic planning. With Atlantic supply lines secured, Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion, became logistically viable. The massive accumulation of troops, vehicles, ammunition and supplies required for the Normandy invasion depended entirely on uninterrupted Atlantic convoys. If U-boats had continued sinking ships at 1942-1943 rates, D-Day would have been delayed by months, possibly years. That delay might have allowed Germany to complete development of jet aircraft, ballistic missiles, and other advanced weapons that could have prolonged the war indefinitely. In a very real sense, Frederick Meyer's arrest in March 1943 shortened World War II. That truth was never publicly acknowledged. Historians debating the turning points of the Atlantic campaign focused on sonar technology, depth charges, escort carrier deployment, and code breaking at Bletchley Park. The coffee stain never made the history books, neither did the Brooklyn mathematics teacher who spilled it. Foster received the Navy Distinguished Service Medal in a closed ceremony in 1946. No press, no publicity. Just Commander Jennings, 3 Navy admirals, and Foster's wife, Sarah, who still packed him liverwurst sandwiches even though the war was over. The citation read, "For exceptionally meritorious service in a duty of great responsibility through innovative analytical methods that contributed significantly to Allied naval operations in the Atlantic theater." Foster kept the medal in a desk drawer. He never wore it. When his children asked years later what he'd done during the war, he said, "Paperwork mostly, analysis, nothing exciting." That was technically true, and an absolute lie. The invisible heroes of World War II weren't always soldiers storming beaches or pilots flying through flak. Sometimes they were mathematics teachers working 18-hour shifts in basement offices, drinking terrible coffee, filling out endless spreadsheets, looking for patterns in data that killed thousands if you missed them. Sometimes victory came from noticing what everyone else ignored, an irregular concentration of attacks, a statistical anomaly, a coffee stain spreading across a map in exactly the right shape to reveal truth. On August 15, 1963, Foster retired from teaching after 32 years. His colleagues threw him a small party in the faculty lounge. They gave him a gold watch. Students signed a card. The principal made a speech about dedication to education. Nobody mentioned that the elderly man eating sheet cake had once identified an espionage network that saved 25,000 lives and helped win the most destructive war in human history. Foster didn't mind the anonymity. In fact, he preferred it. The sailors who came home because he'd spilled coffee, they lived full lives, raised families, built careers, never knowing some Brooklyn teacher's clumsiness had saved them. That was enough, more than enough. He passed away in his sleep on November 3, 1979, at age 77. His obituary in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle was 4 sentences long. Robert Foster, retired mathematics teacher and Navy veteran, died peacefully at home. He is survived by his wife Sarah, 3 children, and 7 grandchildren. Foster taught at James Madison High School for 32 years. Services will be held Friday at Holy Cross Cemetery. The obituary didn't mention U-boats. It didn't mention coffee stains. It didn't mention that Foster's innovative analytical methods had identified the intelligence breach that was killing Allied sailors faster than they could be replaced. The truth remained classified until 1993, 14 years after Foster's death. By then, the Cold War was ending, the Soviet Union was collapsing, and World War II felt like ancient history. But the lesson endured. Sometimes the most important discoveries come from accidents. Sometimes genius isn't about sophisticated analysis or brilliant strategy. Sometimes it's about paying attention when you spill your coffee, noticing the pattern everyone else missed, and having the courage to believe that a brown stain might hold the key to saving thousands of lives. The original coffee-stained map, the one Foster had been working on the night of March 9, 1943, was eventually declassified and donated to the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. It hangs in a small exhibit about naval intelligence, surrounded by Enigma machines, code-breaking equipment, and photographs of serious men in uniform. Museum visitors walk past it without stopping. It looks like what it is: an old, stained map covered with pencil marks and annotations. Nobody notices that the coffee stain is shaped almost perfectly to encompass the exact geographic region where 41 American ships were sunk in 31 days. Nobody realizes that irregular brown ellipse represents one of the most significant counterintelligence breakthroughs of the entire war. They just see a map, an accident, a relic from a war that ended before their grandparents were born. But if you look closely, if you really pay attention, you can still see the pattern, the concentration, the truth hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone clever enough or clumsy enough or desperate enough to notice it. You can see how a mathematics teacher from Brooklyn, working in a basement office with terrible coffee and impossible problems, accidentally stumbled onto the key to saving 25,000 lives. And if you stand there long enough, looking at that stained, faded map, you might understand the most important lesson Robert Foster ever taught. Sometimes the answers we're looking for aren't in the equations we're solving. They're in the accidents we're lucky enough to notice. They're in the coffee stains. They're in the mistakes that reveal patterns nobody else could see. Foster never became famous. He never wanted to be, but he saved 25,000 lives with a coffee mug and a willingness to believe that accidents might contain answers. That's not the kind of heroism that gets parades or monuments. It's the kind that gets 4 sentences in a local obituary and a framed map in a museum nobody visits. It's also the kind of heroism that wins wars. If stories like this, the untold moments, the forgotten heroes, the accidental brilliance that changed everything, fascinate you as much as they do us, hit that subscribe button. We dig deep into World War II's most overlooked corners to bring you the truth hiding in coffee stains and dusty archives. Drop a comment. What other invisible heroes should we uncover? What secrets are still waiting to be told? Let's find them together. This is History That Matters. Don't miss what comes next.